I want to start by telling you about something I discovered when I was still a teacher. I ran across the work of an English photographer named Mr. Toledano. Some of you may be aware of his work. What he did was he went out and gave people video games, and then he took pictures of them while they were playing the video games to capture their expressions and their emotions. It was fascinating to see the types of engagement that you get when you watch the faces of people that are playing these games. And the thought that came to my mind as a teacher at the time was, what would it have looked like had he done the same activity but instead taken pictures of my kids doing homework? Wouldn't have looked like that. And it started me on a journey now of almost 20 years of thinking about how can games be used to really transform and reimagine learning. And so what I want to do is very quickly share you 5 areas where I think there's great potential for games to be particularly transformative. The first is games have an ability to put learners in control. Lots of educational researchers have shown this. There's a whole pile of studies that talk about the value of giving students choice and autonomy. Crazy Dave also knows it too. So between educational researchers and Crazy Dave, you'll probably find out that that's a good thing to do. Somebody I was talking to from Electronic Arts, and they said that in the EA Sports games, they intentionally are designed to give players a decision, a choice to make every 1 to 2 seconds, and feedback on those choices every 7 to 10 seconds. That's an amazing concept that we do not apply in general education practice, and one that we can learn very powerfully from games. Just for the record, when we do stuff like this in education, this does not count as giving students choice or autonomy. I know, I'm sorry to break that news to you, but that is, in fact, the case. There are some fantastic opportunities. This is a game called Our Courts that some of you may be familiar with. Some of you here may have even worked on it, which allows students to make decisions about court cases. It sets up parameters, and then within those parameters allows them to have the autonomy to make their own decisions and to learn. Second thing I'm excited about, games have the ability to adapt to learners' needs in some pretty amazing ways. Every student is going to need different things at different times. Their abilities are different. They have, on a daily basis, where they're at, what their level of competency is, will be changing. And there's something that all of the educational researchers in the room are familiar with, and it's a concept by an educational psychologist named Lev Vygotsky, and it's called the zone of proximal development. And basically, what he said was, there's this thing, it's this circle, I'm representing it as a circle, of things that you can do, skills that you have that you can successfully demonstrate. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that falls outside of that bucket, and those are the things that you can't do. But then there's this space, it's this really awesome space that's right on the edge, hovers right on the rim between those two, called the zone of proximal development. And it's the stuff that you can do with a little bit of support, a little bit of help. And then as you do that with a little bit of help and support, the circle of the stuff that you can do grows, and then your zone of proximal development moves out into the stuff that you couldn't do at all before. Games do a wonderful job of holding people like a surfer on a wave in their zone of proximal development. And you know this is true because if games were too easy, if they were just squarely in the center of the green part, it'd be boring because everybody knew how to do them. If they were too hard, you'd give up. But if you can just hold people right in their zone of proximal development, you will get people to play for hours and hours and hours. And so that's a very powerful piece of learning that we can take from the way games approach this. And this is true for not just games that are very fun to play, but ones that actually teach as well. There's an interesting game that some of you may have played where it starts by having you just move some junk around a pond. And after a little while, that junk in the pond starts to turn into some X's and B's. And before you know it, you have kids, and I've had my kids do this, solving full algebraic equations because it's just gradually expanding their zone of proximal development. Really powerful stuff. Number 3, games allow for safe failure. There's the famous IBM founder quote about doubling your failure rate if you want more opportunity to succeed. In education, we have a bit of a challenge because we're very failure adverse. And unfortunately, by being so failure adverse, we lose some great opportunities to learn. If I take an algebra test and I fail it, there are immediate negative consequences, but the most severe one is I don't have that as a learning opportunity. However, if we take example of a good game, where failure actually becomes the opportunity to try again and get it right. Could you imagine what a terrible game experience would be if you got it right the first try? If you went on and played and you just won the game? It'd be a horrible game. And so part of what's so powerful is the opportunity that failure is an opportunity to play more. And in the learning space, we need to be able to harness that as well. Failure, learning something, doing something wrong needs to be an opportunity to get to play more, to get to engage more. And sometimes that means your plant is going to die. And sometimes that means you're going to get yelled at by the judge. But you always will get an opportunity to learn. Number 4, games put learning in context. Another challenging thing that we tend to do in education is we explain lots of abstract concepts. And along with those abstract concepts, we have to give a lot of long abstract instructions. So we say things like this: there's a shape, and here's where you put it, divide the screen in half, move it in the middle, 2 inches up from the bottom. We give these sort of long explanations. But with games, we do something very different. There's an important first step that we put in, and we start with some context. And we say, this is the context in which this activity will happen. Now, here's something that we explain, and then we present a problem. And very complex, difficult tasks suddenly become much easier to conquer because we've provided some context around something that really previously didn't have much relevance. And this is something that we see throughout all kinds of really fantastic games. Number 5, games help us rethink assessing learning. We are in a very interesting time right now. There is so much debate about testing, about making sure how much testing should happen, how much testing should be allowed in schools. And there's this back and forth because we have a lot of people saying too much testing is happening in schools. And on the other hand, we say, but if we don't test students, then we have it's very clear that some students get left behind. And that other students it could go way too long before we realize when they're off track and have really detrimental concepts. And so there's this test, not test, test, not test debate. But what I'm really excited about is a third option that people aren't talking about yet, which is, why don't we just build some better tests? Why don't we build assessments that feel like this? That feel like games that people want to continue to play and engage in. And we absolutely can do that. And so let's shift that discussion and show what phenomenal assessments can look like that are indistinguishable from the fun, engaging part of the learning experience. So my last piece here is, why now? Maybe 2 reasons for why now. And there's probably a bunch. If I asked all of you to raise your hands and say why now, you'd have a reason and it would all be good and maybe better than mine. But I want to give you 2 reasons why I think it's really important that we think about this now. The first is we have an opportunity to leverage new infrastructure that we did not have before. I want to put that in perspective for 1 second. There's an initiative that we have called the ConnectEd initiative. That was something that we've worked on under the direction of the president. And the goal was to get schools connected to broadband. When we started, there's about 100,000 schools in the country. When we started, about 30,000 schools had access to high-speed internet in the classroom, which is a big problem. Based on some really significant changes that are happening in some programs through the FCC and some programs at the Department of Education, within about 2 years, 70,000 schools are going to come online in a way they hadn't been before. 70,000 schools will have access to internet in the classroom that they have not had before. That is, I believe, one of the most important, most significant changes that we have seen, maybe that we will ever see in the history of education, is the ability to connect those schools to the future. And along with that shift is going to become an opportunity to use all kinds of new types of media, tools, and approaches to make this happen. I will tell you, and I will be really clear, that if we do not come up with some really fantastic options to leverage there will be plenty of people that are willing to take a textbook and scan it into a PDF and put it onto a tablet, and that will be the type of media that is used in those connected classrooms. And if that happens, shame on us all. And so what we need to do is help make sure there are great, compelling alternative options. And that ties into my second opportunity, which is why now. And my second part of why now is that we are in the middle of a shift across the country of adopting new curricular standards, new opportunities to do harder, more challenging tasks in schools, more challenging activities that are more relevant and that align to what students need when they get to college and career. And along with that shift comes a whole lot of rethinking of all of the types of educational materials that we're using in schools today. And it turns out that that list of curricular standards makes a really nice set of game design challenges. And so I think that's one of the ways that we need to be looking at what those are. And so with that in mind, don't shy away from the hard topics. Go pick the hard tasks. Don't settle for quick little games that just kind of reinforce something that isn't really necessary. Go for the big, tough topics and show how we can use these tools to transform learning. We just released a guide last week to help you do this. This is a guide called the EdTech Developers Guide and gives lots of examples and ideas for how you can leverage the new infrastructure and a whole variety of supports to make this happen. My final thought is this. Sometimes I hear people say we need to make learning fun. And I actually fundamentally disagree with that concept, because learning is fun. We don't need to make learning fun. We need to stop making learning boring. And that is a key task that we all need to be thinking about. Games have a powerful lever. They are a powerful lever to transform learning in our country. If we do it right, we can close persistent achievement gaps, we can push learners to much higher level, and at the same time, greatly increase their level of engagement with learning. And if we do it right, if we get it right, doing homework or taking tests even will feel a lot more like this. Thank you very much.